The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street of Cedar Ridge when the delegation arrived at Samuel Morgan's ranch. Four men in dark suits and stern expressions, led by Father Martinez from the mission school and backed by the territorial Indian agent, rode up to his porch with the certainty of men who believed righteousness was on their side. Samuel watched them approach from his kitchen window, where he'd been teaching 16-year-old Ayanna the finer points of English literature. The Iliad lay open between them, and Ayanna's dark eyes had been bright with curiosity as she'd asked him about the nature of heroism. Now those same eyes filled with apprehension as she recognized the visitors. "They've come for me," she said quietly, her English carrying only the faintest trace of her Apache heritage, a heritage these men would try to strip away entirely if given the chance. "No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go," Samuel replied firmly, though his heart hammered against his ribs. He'd been dreading this day for the 6 months since he'd found Ayanna half dead from starvation and exposure, the sole survivor of a military raid that had scattered her band to the winds. The knock on the door came sharp and official. Samuel squeezed Ayanna's shoulder gently before answering it, finding Father Martinez's weathered face set in lines of determined charity. "Mr. Morgan," the priest began without preamble, "we've come about the Indian girl you've been harboring. It's time she came to the mission school where she can receive proper Christian education and be civilized. Her name is Ayanna," Samuel said, not moving from the doorway, "and she's receiving an excellent education right here." Agent Blackwood, a thin man with calculating eyes, stepped forward. "Mr. Morgan, you're not qualified to educate an Indian child. The government has established proper facilities for that purpose. The girl needs to learn to abandon her savage ways and become a productive member of civilized society." "Savage ways?" Samuel's voice carried a dangerous edge. "You mean like speaking 3 languages fluently, reading classical literature, and demonstrating more natural compassion than most adults I've met? You're confusing education with sentimentality," Father Martinez said. "The child needs structure, discipline, religious instruction. She needs to have the Indian beaten out of her and replaced with Christian values." Samuel felt Ayanna step up behind him, her presence warm and steady at his back. "With respect, Father," she said, her voice clear and articulate, "I am already Christian. Mr. Morgan has shared the Gospels with me, and I have found much wisdom in Christ's teachings about love, compassion, and acceptance." The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such eloquent resistance from their target. "You see," Agent Blackwood said, as if her words proved his point, "she's been allowed to develop ideas above her station. At the mission school, she'll learn proper humility and her place in the world." "Her place in the world," Samuel repeated slowly, "is wherever her intelligence, kindness, and talents can best serve others, not in some institution designed to break her spirit. Mr. Morgan." Father Martinez's voice took on the tone of strained patience. "I understand you've grown attached to the girl, but sentiment cannot override the law. Indian children are required to attend government-approved schools. Show me the law that says a legally adopted child must attend a specific school." Samuel challenged. The silence that followed was telling. Agent Blackwood's face flushed red. "You haven't legally adopted her. The paperwork is being processed through the territorial courts." Samuel lied smoothly. "Judge Harrison is handling it personally." It wasn't entirely untrue. Samuel had been considering adoption proceedings, though he hadn't yet begun them, but the mention of Judge Harrison, a friend from his military days who happened to outrank everyone present, gave the delegation pause. "Even if that were true," Father Martinez said, recovering first, "the girl still needs proper guidance. Look at her, she's been allowed to dress like a white woman. To forget her heritage needs to be corrected, not celebrated." Samuel felt his temper flare, but Ayanna's gentle hand on his arm kept him calm. "Father," she said respectfully, "with your permission, may I ask you something?" The priest nodded warily. "When Christ walked among the people, did he require them to abandon their heritage before he would love them? Did he demand that the Samaritans become Jews or the Gentiles become Israelites before he would offer them salvation?" Father Martinez blinked, clearly not expecting a theological discussion from an Apache teenager. Christ's message, Ayanna continued, was that love transcends all boundaries, race, culture, background. He met people where they were and loved them as they were. Is that not the true Christian way? The girl is clever, Agent Blackwood said dismissively. But cleverness without proper guidance leads to dangerous ideas. She needs to learn her place. Her place, Samuel said, his voice deadly quiet, is as a daughter in my home, a student, in my library, and a young woman with unlimited potential. If you want to take her from here, you'll have to go through me. The threat hung in the air between them. Samuel Morgan wasn't just any rancher, he was a decorated Civil War veteran, with connections throughout the territorial government. More importantly, he was a man who'd seen enough injustice to recognize it when it came knocking on his door. This isn't over, Agent Blackwood said finally. There are proper channels, proper procedures. The girl belongs in the mission school, and we'll see that she gets there. After they left, Samuel found Ayanna standing by the window, watching the dust cloud of their departure settle over the horizon. They'll be back, she said quietly. Let them come. I meant what I said, they're not taking you anywhere. Ayanna turned to face him, and Samuel was struck anew by the intelligence and dignity in her dark eyes. Over the past 6 months, he'd watched her blossom from a traumatized, half-starved child into a remarkable young woman. She'd absorbed everything he taught her like a sponge, but more than that, she'd taught him things in return about resilience, about finding joy in small moments, about the richness of her own culture that these men wanted to erase. Samuel, she said, using his given name for the first time since they'd met, why are you protecting me? You could have a peaceful life without this trouble. Samuel considered the question, thinking about the loneliness that had defined his existence before Ayanna's arrival. His wife had died in childbirth 10 years ago, taking their unborn son with her, and he'd resigned himself to a life of solitary grief. Ayanna's presence had awakened something in him he'd thought was dead forever, the desire to nurture, to teach, to be part of something larger than his own sorrow. Because, he said finally, you've given me a reason to fight for something again. Because watching you learn and grow has reminded me what hope looks like. And because, he paused, struggling with emotions he'd kept buried for a decade. Because, you've become the daughter I never got to have. Tears filled Ayanna's eyes. And you've become the father I thought I'd lost forever. In that moment, Samuel knew he would move mountains to protect this extraordinary girl who'd wandered into his life. Like an answer to prayers he'd been afraid to voice. The delegation might return with legal documents and government authority, but they would find that some bonds were stronger than paperwork. Come on, he said, gesturing toward the kitchen table where the Iliad still lay open. Let's finish talking about Achilles and what it really means to be a hero. As they returned to their lesson, neither mentioned the storm clouds gathering. On the horizon, there would be time enough to face that battle when it came. For now, there was only the simple joy of shared learning, the warmth of chosen family, and the quiet revolution of an Apache girl reading Homer, while her adoptive father looked on with pride. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and the promise of difficult days ahead. But inside the ranch house, love was already proving to be the most powerful language of all. 2 weeks after the delegation's visit, Ayanna woke to find Samuel already at work in his study. Correspondence spread across his desk like battle plans. She'd learned to read his moods in the set of his shoulders, and this morning they carried the weight of a man preparing for war. Letter from Judge Harrison, Samuel said without looking up as she brought him coffee. The adoption papers have been expedited, but Agent Blackwood is pushing back hard. He's claiming I'm unfit to raise an Indian child because I'm not providing proper cultural correction. Ayanna set the cup down carefully, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. What does that mean? It means they think I should be beating the Apache out of you instead of celebrating the remarkable young woman you are. Samuel's voice carried a fury that made her heart clench. They want you to forget your grandmother's stories, your people's history, everything that makes you who you are. And if I refuse to forget, Samuel looked up then, and Ayanna saw something fierce and protective in his blue eyes. Then they'll try to force you to forget. The mission schools, they have methods. They cut children's hair, forbid them to speak their native languages, punish them for any display of their heritage. They call it killing the Indian to save the man. Ayanna felt ice form in her stomach. She'd heard whispers of the mission schools from other Apache, stories that made even the bravest warriors weep. Children who went in speaking their mother tongue and came out as strangers to their own families. Children who forgot the songs their grandmothers had sung them, who looked at sacred places with blank, uncomprehending eyes. "I won't go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You won't have to," Samuel said firmly. "I've been corresponding with some friends back east, lawyers, politicians, people who understand that this forced assimilation is wrong. There's a growing movement to reform the Indian education system, but they have the law on their side now. Bad laws can be changed, and until they are, good people have to resist them." Samuel stood and moved to the window, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains where Ayanna's people had once roamed freely. "I've been thinking about what you said to Father Martinez, about Christ's message of love transcending boundaries. You were right, you know. My grandmother used to say that truth was like water, it always finds a way through, no matter what tries to block it." Ayanna joined him at the window, drawing comfort from his solid presence beside her. She also said that love was the only force stronger than hatred. "Wise woman, your grandmother, she would have liked you, I think. She always said that a person's worth could be measured by how they treated those who had nothing to offer them in return." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "What do you remember about her, about your life before?" It was a question he'd never asked directly, respecting her privacy, her need to share her past on her own terms. Now, facing the possibility of forced separation, Ayanna found herself wanting to preserve those memories by sharing them. She was a storyteller, Ayanna said, her voice soft with remembrance. She knew the history of our people going back generations, not just the facts, but the heart of it. Why we moved when we moved, why certain places were sacred, how the old ones learned to read the language of the land. You speak of it in such beautiful terms. How can they think it's something to be ashamed of? Because they don't understand it. And people often try to destroy what they don't understand. Ayanna leaned against the window frame, her reflection merging with the landscape beyond. "But Samuel, there's something you should know. Learning your ways, reading your books, speaking your language, it hasn't made me less Apache. If anything, it's made me more proud of my heritage." "How so?" "Because now I can see the beauty in both worlds. I can read Homer and understand that every culture has its heroes, its stories of courage and love. I can study mathematics and see that truth is universal. I can learn about Christianity and recognize the same wisdom my grandmother taught me, that love is the foundation of everything good in this world." Samuel turned to face her fully, and Ayanna saw something like wonder in his expression. "You've become something extraordinary. You know that. A bridge between worlds. Is that why you're fighting for me? Because I'm some sort of curiosity?" "No," Samuel said immediately, his voice fierce with emotion. "I'm fighting for you because you're my daughter, because you've brought joy back into my life when I thought it was gone forever, because watching you grow and learn has reminded me why life is worth living." Tears stung Ayanna's eyes. "And you've shown me that not all white men are like the soldiers who destroyed my village. You've shown me that kindness exists, that there are people who see value in preserving rather than destroying." That afternoon, as they worked together in Samuel's garden, another skill Ayanna had mastered with typical quick intelligence, a rider approached the ranch. It was Tommy Blackwood, the Indian agent's son, a boy about Ayanna's age whom she'd met in town. "Miss Ayanna," Tommy called out, dismounting near the garden gate. "My father sent me to deliver a message." Samuel straightened, his body tensing for confrontation, but Ayanna placed a calming hand on his arm. "What message, Tommy?" The boy looked uncomfortable, shuffling his feet in the dust. He says if you come to the mission school voluntarily, it'll go easier for you. If you keep fighting, he'll have to use force. And what do you think?" "Tommy," Ayanna asked gently, "do you think I should go?" Tommy glanced nervously at Samuel, then back at Ayanna. I don't know. My father says it's for your own good, that you need to learn to be civilized." But he trailed off, clearly struggling with something. But Ayanna encouraged. "But you seem pretty civilized already," Tommy burst out. You speak better English than most folks in town. You read books I can't even understand. And you're always polite and kind. I don't understand why you need to change." Samuel and Ayanna exchanged a look. Here was proof that not everyone accepted the prevailing wisdom about Indian education. "Tommy," Samuel said carefully, "what would you do if someone told you that everything your parents taught you was wrong, that you had to forget your family's stories, your traditions, everything that made you who you are?" Tommy's eyes widened as he considered the question. I guess I'd be pretty scared. And angry too. That's what they're asking Ayanna to do," Samuel explained. "They want her to pretend that her grandmother never existed, that her people's wisdom is worthless, that she should be ashamed of who she is. But that's not right," Tommy said, his young voice filled with indignation. "Miss Ayanna's grandmother must have been real special to raise someone like her." Ayanna felt her heart swell with affection for this earnest boy who was trying so hard to understand. "She was, Tommy. She taught me that every person carries the wisdom of their ancestors, and that wisdom should be honored, not erased. I'm going to tell my father what I think," Tommy declared with the courage of youth. "Maybe if he understands better, he'll leave you alone." After Tommy left, Samuel put his arm around Ayanna's shoulders. "You handled that beautifully. You're teaching that boy to question authority, to think for himself. My grandmother always said that the best teachers don't just share knowledge. They inspire others to seek truth for themselves." She sounds more and more like someone I would have liked very much. That evening, as they sat by the fire reading together, Ayanna working through Emerson while Samuel reviewed legal documents, she looked up from her book with a thoughtful expression. "Samuel, can I ask you something? Always, when you look at me, what do you see?" Samuel set down his papers, giving her question the consideration it deserved. "I see a brilliant young woman with unlimited potential. I see someone who's survived tragedy and chosen hope. I see my daughter, who happens to be Apache, and who's taught me that heritage isn't something to be overcome, it's something to be treasured. Even though I'm not white, even though my presence here brings you trouble, Ayanna," Samuel said, his voice gentle but firm, "love doesn't see color. Love sees the heart, and your heart is one of the most beautiful things I've ever encountered." As the fire crackled between them and the wind whispered secrets outside, Ayanna understood that she'd learned the most important lesson of all, not from books or formal education, but from the daily example of a man who'd chosen to see her worth when the world insisted she had none. Love truly was the most powerful language, and Samuel Morgan had taught her to speak it fluently. The crisis came on a cold morning in November, when Ayanna was helping Samuel repair a fence damaged by autumn storms. She was passing him tools and discussing the philosophical implications of Thoreau's civil disobedience when they saw the dust cloud on the horizon, too large for a single rider, too organized for casual travelers. "They're coming," Samuel said grimly, setting down his hammer, "and they've brought reinforcements." This time the delegation included not just Father Martinez and Agent Blackwood, but also a federal marshal, to territorial officials, and a matron from the mission school, a severe woman in gray dress whose eyes held all the warmth of winter stones. "Mr. Morgan," the marshal called out as they approached, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority, "I have papers here requiring the immediate transfer of the Indian child known as Ayanna to the Carlisle Mission School for proper education and assimilation." Samuel stepped protectively in front of Ayanna, though she remained close enough to hear every word. "I told you before, she's in the process of being legally adopted. Judge Harrison's jurisdiction has been superseded." Agent Blackwood interrupted, a note of triumph in his voice. "This is now a federal matter. The girl belongs in an institution designed for her kind." "Her kind?" Samuel's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You mean intelligent, compassionate, educated young women?" "I mean savage Indians who need civilizing," Blackwood replied bluntly. "Look at her, Morgan. You've let her get ideas above her station. She thinks she's equal to white children, thinks she deserves the same treatment. That kind of thinking is dangerous. The only dangerous thing here," Samuel said, his hand moving to the rifle leaning against the fence post, "is your ignorance." The matron from the mission school stepped forward, her cold gaze fixed on Ayanna. "Child, come with me now. You'll learn proper submission and humility at our school. We'll cure you of these uppity notions you've been allowed to develop." For the first time since the confrontation began, Ayanna spoke, "Ma'am," with respect. "I am not sick and therefore need no cure." The matron's face flushed with anger. "See? This is exactly what I mean. Insolence, defiance, all results of improper guidance. At our school, you'll learn to speak only when spoken to." "At your school," Ayanna replied with dignity that made Samuel's heart swell with pride. "Would I still be allowed to read? Reading is a privilege earned through obedience and proper behavior." "I see. And would I be allowed to continue studying literature, mathematics, and philosophy?" The matron's laugh was harsh and cold. "Literature and philosophy, child? You'll be learning to scrub floors, wash laundry, and serve your betters. Education beyond basic reading and arithmetic is wasted on your kind." Samuel felt something snap. Inside him, "Get off my property. Now, Mr. Morgan," the marshal said, his hand moving to his weapon. "You're interfering with federal business. Stand aside, or I'll be forced to arrest you." "Then arrest me," Samuel said, moving to put himself fully between Ayanna and the officials. "Because I'll die before I let you take her to be broken and brutalized in the name of civilization." "Samuel." "No," Ayanna said quietly, stepping up beside him. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me, and I won't let them destroy you," Samuel replied fiercely. "Not while I have breath in my body." For a moment, the standoff was complete, armed men facing each other across the gulf of fundamentally different beliefs about human worth and dignity. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "What seems to be the problem here?" Everyone turned to see Judge Harrison approaching on horseback, his elderly frame still carrying the authority of decades on the territorial bench. Behind him rode Sheriff Williams and, to everyone's surprise, Tommy Blackwood. "Judge Harrison." Agent Blackwood sputtered, "This is federal business. You have no jurisdiction here." "I have jurisdiction over adoption proceedings in my territory," the judge replied calmly, dismounting with the careful movements of advanced age. "And as it happens, I've just finished processing some rather important paperwork." He pulled a document from his coat and handed it to Samuel. "Congratulations, Mr. Morgan. The adoption is complete and legally binding. Miss Ayanna Morgan is now officially your daughter under territorial law." Agent Blackwood's face went purple with rage. "That changes nothing. Federal law supersedes territorial law in matters of Indian education." "Ah." Judge Harrison smiled, "But it doesn't supersede parental rights. And as Ayanna's legal father, Mr. Morgan has the right to choose her education." "But she's Indian." "She's a citizen," the judge corrected, "under territorial law. Adopted children assume the citizenship status of their adoptive parents. Miss Morgan is no longer subject to federal Indian policy." The legal maneuvering was impressive, but Samuel could see that Agent Blackwood wasn't finished. "This is a fraud," the agent declared, "a clear attempt to circumvent federal law. I'll have this adoption overturned in federal court. You're welcome to try." Judge Harrison said mildly, "But you should know that this case has attracted some attention back east. Senator Mitchell has taken a personal interest, as have several prominent church leaders who question whether forced assimilation serves any Christian purpose." "Senator Mitchell," the marshal looked uncertain for the first time. "The chairman of the Indian Affairs Committee, the very one. He's been reading some fascinating correspondence about a young Apache woman who's become remarkably well-educated without losing her cultural identity. He's quite interested in her case as a model for educational reform." Samuel felt Ayanna squeeze his hand, and he looked down to see her dark eyes bright with hope and gratitude. "This isn't over." Agent Blackwood snarled, but the fight had gone out of him. Without federal backing, his authority was limited. "Actually," Tommy Blackwood said, speaking up for the first time, "I think it is over, Pa." All eyes turned to the boy, who stood straighter under the attention. "I've been talking to folks in town, asking them what they think about Miss Ayanna. You know what they told me?" "Tommy," his father warned, "this isn't your concern." "It is my concern," Tommy said with surprising firmness. "Miss Ayanna helped my sister when she was sick, taught her to read better, and never once made her feel stupid for asking questions. Mrs. Henderson says she's the politest young lady she's ever met. Even Reverend Thompson says she knows the Bible better than most of his congregation. The boy has a point, Sheriff Williams added. Far as I can see, Miss Ayanna's been nothing but a credit to this community. Seems foolish to force her away just because of who her grandparents were. Agent Blackwood looked around at the faces surrounding him, at his own son's defiant expression, at the judge's knowing smile, at Samuel's protective stance and Ayanna's quiet dignity. The wind had shifted, and he was smart enough to recognize defeat. This is a perversion of justice, he muttered, but he was already mounting his horse Dot as the delegation rode away in defeat. Judge Harrison approached Samuel and Ayanna with a gentle smile. Well, daughter, he said to Ayanna, how does it feel to be officially part of the Morgan family? Ayanna's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. It feels like coming home, Judge Harrison. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your father. He's moved mountains to protect you. That evening, as they sat by the fire with Ayanna's newly minted adoption papers spread on the table between them, Samuel found himself thinking about the strange turns life could take. Samuel, Ayanna said softly, can I ask you something? Always. When you first found me, did you ever imagine it would come to this? Samuel considered the question, remembering the half-starved, traumatized girl he'd discovered months ago. Honestly, I was just thinking about keeping you alive from one day to the next. I never imagined you'd become so important to me that I'd be willing to face down the federal government to protect you. And I never imagined I'd find a father who would see my heritage as something to be celebrated, rather than hidden. Your grandmother would be proud, Samuel said. You've honored her memory by refusing to be ashamed of who you are. She would have liked you too, Ayanna replied. She always said that the greatest warriors weren't the ones who conquered others, but the ones who conquered hatred with love. As the fire crackled between them and the night settled around their home, Samuel reflected on the truth of her words. The battle they'd fought and won hadn't been about legal documents or federal authority. It had been about the radical idea that love could transcend the boundaries society tried to impose, in teaching Ayanna that she was worthy of love and respect regardless of her heritage. Samuel had learned something equally important, that the most powerful form of resistance to injustice wasn't violence or legal maneuvering, but the simple act of loving someone the world insisted was unlovable. Years later, when Ayanna became a teacher herself, working to create schools where Indian children could learn without losing themselves, she would remember this lesson. She would teach her students that education was about adding to who they were, not subtracting from it. She would show them that love was indeed the most important language, and that it could be spoken in Apache and English with equal fluency. But on this night, in the warm glow of the firelight, she was simply a daughter sitting with her father, both of them grateful for the miraculous power of love to create family. Where none had existed before, the mission school still stood on the other side of the territory, still breaking children in the name of civilization. But in this small corner of the world, love had proven stronger than law, stronger than prejudice, stronger than the forces that sought to divide people by the color of their skin or the language of their prayers. And that, Samuel and Ayanna both knew, was the most valuable lesson of all. Thank you for following Ayanna and Samuel's inspiring journey from rescue to family, from cultural persecution to celebration of heritage. This powerful story reminds us that true education enhances rather than erases identity, and that love is indeed the most important language we can learn to speak. If this tale of courage, acceptance, and the power of chosen family touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories about overcoming prejudice and finding belonging. Your support helps us continue sharing these vital narratives about the triumph of love over fear and the importance of honoring all cultures. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are many more inspiring adventures waiting for you.